Good morning. Today is the first day of Sivan, Rosh Chodesh Sivan, and this day, the first of the third month, the Jewish people came to the desert of Sinai, to Mount Sinai, and they encamped there. And it says that this was the day that they camped as one person with one heart, in complete unity. It's also the 21st of May, and there's a special situation now that's going to be going on for the next 5 weeks. That here in the land of Israel we're going to be reading this Shabbat Parashat Naso. And in Chutz La'aretz, because there's going to be 2 days of Shavuot, the holiday is 2 days long and not 1 day long the way it is here. So this Shabbat you won't be reading Naso, you'll only be reading it the Shabbat after. But in terms of the weekly reading, it's still Naso. It's going to be Naso now for 2 weeks in Chutz La'aretz. And then we're going to diverge for a little bit of time. For 5 weeks, we'll be reading 1 parsha ahead, and then we'll come to the 6th and 7th parshas of the book of Numbers, Chukat and Balak. Then you'll catch up, you'll read 2 parashot together. So we could do a number of things this week. We could just go over Naso twice, and I thought that would be a great exercise because many times people feel that Parashat Naso is boring. And why is it boring? Because it's very repetitive. It's the longest parsha in the entire Torah. It's 176 verses, and many of them seem to be completely repetitious, with the special sacrifices brought by the kings of each of the tribes, the Nesi'im as they're called. So I thought it would be a beautiful exercise for us to go over a parsha that seems to be so boring twice, to show that it's not like that at all.
I love the idea.
So that's one option. Let's see if we go in that direction. But let's start today, since we have so many days. We have probably 12 or 13 times that we'll meet on this parsha, so maybe 11 times only. So let's start with a general introduction, and this is a great parsha to do it with because exactly because of the length of it and because of the seeming repetition. There's a principle that all of the topics in each parsha are related to the name of the parsha, and to the first story that name was given for. Usually the name is selected as one of the first words in the parsha. Usually it's not Vaydaber Hashem Moshe Lemo, it's not God spoke to Moses saying. Many parshot start with those words. It's usually the next verse. And in our case, it means Naso. Naso literally means, in this case, to count. It's a very interesting thing that it's using the word to count, but really, it's not a regular counting, because in this case, the count itself is already giving those who are being counted their particular duties. So actually we started, if you remember last week, Moses was told to count the Jewish people, and he was told not to count the Levites amongst them, because the Levites were destined to be separate in the sense that they would continue into the land of Israel, and we spoke about that last week. But at the end of Numbers, which we didn't go over because it was the 7th reading, at the end of Numbers, Moses is instructed to count the Levites separately. And indeed he starts at the end of Numbers and he counts the Levites, the third of the Levites. The Levites are divided into 3 families. Their names are Kehat, Gershon, and Merari. Kehat was the one that was counted last week. And this week we have Gershon and Merari. And we begin with the counting, Naso et Rosh Bnei Gershon Gamhem, count and appoint the members of the family of Gershon, one of the 3 families of the Levites, and give them their duties in the tabernacle, which was to carry the coverings and everything that was around. So what does this word Naso mean? So until now we said it just means to count and appoint at the same time. It's a little bit like the word lifkod. Lifkod also means to count, and it also means to appoint. So it's very interesting that in Hebrew, we don't have time to get into all the halachic ramifications of this, because there are many. It's the idea that something that is counted, that people usually count, cannot be ignored. Meaning, for instance, when I'm looking at a mixture of two things, can I ignore one of the things there if it's less than half? So there's a principle that you can't ignore something that is counted usually, that people usually count. Like, for instance, eggs. Nobody buys eggs by the weight. They buy them by the number. You buy them by the dozen. You buy them. There are things that you, on principle, people count them. They don't buy them by a gross measure. But without getting into that right now, we said the principle is that all of the topics in the parsha follow the name of the parsha. This is true for all of the parshas. But let us now look at just at the beginning, at least, of our parsha. What does Naso also mean? It also means, particularly in Chassidus, Nesi'at Hafachim. Nesi'at Hafachim means to carry opposites. What exactly is that? So one way of thinking of carrying opposites is that it means to sustain a paradox. It's not exactly the same idiom. There is a separate idiom called nimna'a, or kiyum hanimna'a, which means to sustain a paradox, but it basically means the same thing. It's for two opposites to exist in the same place, two opposites to exist together. Why is it called carrying or lifting up? Naso means to lift something up. So if we count how many times does this verb appear in the parsha, we'll find that it's an incredible 32 times. 32 times we find this verb in this parsha, which is very uncommon even for names like in Bereshit. We don't find the verb bara 32 times. We find it many times, but not 32 times. This is, again, it's a very long parsha, and it has a whole section on the Nesi'im, on the kings of the tribes. So there is a lot of Naso there. There is Nun Shin Aleph. This verb appears many times. The basic concept of Naso is to lift the mind up to the heart. It seems to be backwards, because the heart is lower than the mind. But when we talk about cognition, when we talk about epistemology, what each one can understand, Chassidus explains that the mind cannot tolerate opposites. It's a very important point. The mind cannot tolerate paradox. It cannot tolerate there being two things that are opposite to one another. The mind can tolerate a paradox if it divides it in terms of time. Meaning, I can feel love and then I feel hate. But I can't, well, maybe that's not the best example. If I take, for instance, the sentence, this sentence is false. So, if I take this sentence to be true, then what is it saying about itself? It's saying that it's false. If I take it to be false, then it must be true. But then if it's true, it must be false. And you keep going back and forth among these. There's a paradox inherent within this sentence. So the mind cannot tolerate that. But the heart can. And so we need to lift the mind up to the heart, to what we call the wisdom of the heart. The wisdom of the heart is exactly one of the most important phrases in the Zohar that says, and the Tanya is in many ways built on this statement. It says that the heart is divided constantly. It has, on the one hand, a feeling of joy. Joy is ingrained in the heart from one side. The joy is inherent in the heart from one side. But there's another side to the heart. There's sadness and tears in the heart from the other side. and they exist together always. There is no such thing, actually, for a heart not to be divided between the joy and the sorrow that are in it. So, for instance, the joy is that I'm alive, that I have an opportunity to follow God, that I have an opportunity to do mitzvot, all the good things in my life. But I'm also always in a state of sorrow because there's so much that still needs to be rectified in the world. Because what is the world like? In what state is it in? It's not in a state of Geulah. It's not in a state of redemption yet. So even though in my personal life there might be many joys, I'm also aware of the surroundings, of my surroundings and my environment. And my environment is full of sorrow. Sometimes in life it's the opposite. That my personal life is full of sorrow. I have all kinds of pains, all kinds of troubles. And so my heart on the one hand is full of crying. On the other hand, the heart is also full of joy. Why? Because I see my surroundings, and Baruch Hashem, there are many people around me who do have great, beautiful, wonderful things happening to them. In general, the joy and the crying or the sorrow, they relate to what we call love of God and fear of God. And so at every time every moment in my life actually, I'm filled with both. Both on the one hand wanting to come close to God, on the other hand having awe and fear and distance from God. The question is, what do I wear on the outside? What do I show the outside world? And what do I feel internally? So for instance, by the Baal Shem Tov, the whole year he showed his joy from the inside on his face. So his face was constantly resonating and radiating joy. In the 10 days of awe that we begin the year with, from Rosh Hashanah until Yom Kippur, he switched it. And inside his heart he felt the joy, and outside he showed the awe. The Rebbe, for instance, he changed this also. And he said that without exception, even during the days of awe, a person should always show on the exterior the right side of the heart, which is the joy, the love of God. And the awe of God should always be internalized. Not like the people, the Rebbe was very much against this, who are always critical because of the awe of God. It's true that when a person comes and says to someone else, you're not doing this right, or you should be doing this, or shouldn't be doing that, they don't necessarily come from a point of view of being pushy. What they really might be feeling is their awe of God resonating. But the Rebbe didn't want that to be that way, and rather that the awe of God should be something internal, and the love of God should be external. So our first excursion into this parsha, Parashat Naso, is that everything that we'll see in this parsha, beginning today with the first reading, is the elevation of the mind into the wisdom of the heart. So that the mind which cannot tolerate paradox has to be brought up to the level of the heart which can. And just one more word about this, the family of Gershon signifies the joy of the heart, and the family of Merari signifies the awe or the sorrow of the heart. And we'll look more at that tomorrow. These are the two families that we will read about in the first and second readings, about their counting and their being appointed to their tasks, and we'll also look at the tasks in that reference. So have everyone a very good week.